Thanks to At Home for joining us this hour on what is a really big night, as it turns out. We didn't know this was going to happen on Tuesday, but this has turned into a huge night in practical American politics. After a crescendo of politics, a crescendo of protests in Senate offices around the country, and in the halls of Capitol Hill and at the Senate last night, both on the floor, where Senate Democrats held the floor for hours, and then they went outside and held the Capitol steps in an impromptu protest that started with just Senator Cory Booker and Congressman John Lewis and soon grew to be hundreds of people on the steps of the Capitol deep into the night. After a score from the Congressional Budget Office that said the Republican bill to kill Obamacare would kick 22 million Americans off their health insurance, and not just off the health insurance you're on now, it would kick 22 million Americans off of all forms of health insurance and leave them uninsured. After all of that, today it became too much for the Republicans in Washington to bear. For a while, I think they thought they could hold the line and they could stop their own senators from peeling off the bill. They knew they had lost Dean Heller of Nevada, and they knew they had lost Susan Collins of Maine. And I think they thought for a while they might be able to hold it there. Even with those two losses, they might be able to still pass the bill by having Vice President Mike Pence come in and cast a tie-breaking vote. But not only did they not hold that line at those two senators, which would have still allowed them to pass the bill, that line just completely collapsed today. It wasn't just Heller and Collins. It was a third senator, and then a fourth, and then a fifth, and then a sixth, and a seventh, and an eighth, and a ninth. So, yeah, they pulled it. And again, this is not Republicans trying and failing to get Democrats to vote with them. This is not some negotiations between parties that failed because of partisan differences between the parties. That does not apply here. Republicans were trying to repeal Obamacare without even talking to the Democrats about it, without even trying for a single Democratic vote. They probably wouldn't want a Democratic vote if they could get one. They were trying to do this only with votes from their own membership, and technically they could. They didn't need any Democrats to do this. This is a Republicans-only affair, and as Republicans today, they failed, which means it remains a strange hallmark of the Trump era in Washington, that even with a new Republican president, even with a large Republican majority in the House and Republican control of the Senate too, it has now been more than 150 days of this new administration with unified Republican control in Washington, and they have yet to pass a single substantive piece of legislation of any kind. There is exactly one new bill that this president has signed that is an honest-to-goodness new policy. It involves making it easier to fire people who work at the VA. That is a bipartisan piece of legislation that was agreed to substantively during the Obama administration, and it just carried over. Beyond that, though, there has been nothing. They have had no legislation on any significant policy whatsoever. And now, as of tonight, they're not able to kill health reform either. So it's a big night in practical politics in America. The Republican effort to try to kill Obamacare once again has collapsed under the weight of even Republicans not being able to support it. We're going to have Senator Cory Booker joining us live in just a moment to talk about this big day for the Democrats, big day for people who want to hold on to the Affordable Care Act. Senator Booker joining us live in just a moment. But I'm also very pleased to say that we're going to be joined live tonight by the senator who is the top Democrat on the Intelligence Committee. Senator Mark Warner of Virginia is going to join us live. This will, I think, be his first ever interview on The Rachel Maddow Show. So I'm very much looking forward to speaking with him, particularly because of the news that has just broken in the Washington Post tonight. As of tonight, there are now two high-ranking officials from the Trump for President campaign who have had to register retroactively as agents of a foreign power. The first one, of course, was Trump National Security Advisor Mike Flynn. He resigned in February as National Security Advisor. Just 3.5 weeks into the new administration, he resigned when the Washington Post reported on contacts and conversations he had had with Russian government officials that he had either not disclosed or he had publicly lied about them. We later learned that the acting Attorney General of the United States had gone to the White House physically herself in the first week of the new administration to warn the White House urgently that their national security advisor, Mike Flynn, had been compromised by the Russian government. He was vulnerable to Russian blackmail or coercion, basically because Russia had proof of all their contacts with him and what he had been saying in his communications with them. And Flynn was lying about those things in his public role as national security advisor. So they had that over Mike Flynn. They could conceivably coerce him to behave in ways that they wanted that would not be good for the United States. Now, after that warning, there remain, even today, a lot of questions about the White House basically having no response to that warning for several weeks. The White House did not, for example, correct the record on any of the things that Flynn or the White House had been lying about. They apparently did not limit his access to highly secret and highly sensitive information, despite what they'd just been told about him. They even allowed Flynn to sit in on a call between the President of the United States and Vladimir Putin. This is after the White House had been warned that Flynn had been compromised by Putin's government. You want to sit in on our call with Vlad? You know him, right? So there remain a lot of questions about how the White House dealt with Mike Flynn after the warning that they got and the evidence that they got about his foreign ties, particularly related to Russia. But ultimately, 18 days after that warning from the Justice Department, it was the Washington Post again that exposed that that warning had been delivered to the White House and that the White House hadn't acted on it. It was finally in mid-February, 18 days after that warning from the Justice Department, that Flynn finally did resign. It was mid-February. And then the month after that, in March, Flynn retroactively registered as a foreign agent. He registered after the fact as having been on the payroll of the government of Turkey during the preceding year when he was working for the Trump campaign. Now, what compelled Mike Flynn to register as a foreign agent that far after the fact? Right? In March, that was not him declaring that he wanted to become a foreign agent. He was declaring retroactively that he had been one before, and he hadn't said anything about it before. I mean, something happened in those weeks after he had to resign in a storm of controversy after the Justice Department lit up like a flare gun when they learned what he was doing. Something happened in Mike Flynn's life in March that made him feel a sudden obligation that maybe he ought to go back and retroactively register for this thing that he was legally required to do. Now, not long after he registered as a foreign agent is when Mike Flynn's lawyer started saying publicly that Mike Flynn would like to request immunity from prosecution in exchange for his testimony about Russia. That's when his lawyer said that Mike Flynn, quote, certainly has a story to tell. And honestly, we don't know why Mike Flynn decided in March to retroactively register as a foreign agent. It is not implausible that he just needed to start getting his legal ducks in a row. Right? We have since learned that Flynn's foreign ties, his foreign business ties, are not just the subject of congressional investigation. They're also being investigated by the special counsel, Robert Mueller, at the FBI. We've learned that Flynn's business ties and foreign connections have been the subject of an investigation by the Department of Defense Inspector General. They've been the subject of grand jury subpoenas sent out under the auspices of the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Eastern District of Virginia. You know, when that kind of thing is going on in your life, I don't know, it doesn't seem unreasonable that you might want to tidy stuff up that you should have legally done that you never took care of before, right? Burn off all the loose threads with a cigarette lighter and hope nobody notices the smoky smell. So that happened with Mike Flynn in March, right? He quits in February. He retroactively, for some reason, decides it's time to register as a foreign agent in March. And then just a couple of weeks after that, in April, there started to be all these news reports that a second person from the Trump campaign had also retroactively registered as a foreign agent. Starting in April, these news headlines started to appear that suggested, or in some cases just flat out said, that in addition to Mike Flynn, Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort had also now registered as a foreign agent. Paul Manafort, in fact, had not registered as a foreign agent, despite all of those headlines in April. They started in April, they persisted in May, in June, all through this month. You've still seen headlines that say inaccurately that Manafort had registered as a foreign agent. He actually hadn't, which was an interesting contrast with what happened to Mike Flynn, right? I mean, Flynn definitely had business ties, foreign business ties, for which he should have registered, and he didn't at the time. He then resigned from the Trump administration, and a huge cloud of scandal related to Russia. And then soon thereafter, presumably because he was getting good advice or good pressure from the people who oversee this sort of thing at the Justice Department, for some reason, he made sure to file that registration. That's Flynn. Paul Manafort also clearly has lots of foreign ties, lots of foreign business ties. We've all had to learn how to pronounce the names of the Putin-linked oligarchs who Paul Manafort has been in business with. Oleg Deripaska and Dmitry Firtash and Viktor Medvedchuk. There was his own business partner from Ukraine who ran his office, ran the Manafort office in Ukraine. He was a guy who used to work for Russian military intelligence, who then met with Manafort multiple times in the United States during the Trump presidential campaign. Konstantin Kilimnik. There was Viktor Yanukovych, the pro-Putin dictator of Ukraine, whom Manafort worked for a decade until he was deposed and had to flee to Moscow. I mean, clearly Manafort has tons of foreign ties, foreign business ties. He, too, like Mike Flynn, had to resign from the Trump campaign under a huge cloud of scandal relating to Russia. He, too, like Mike Flynn, is reportedly the subject of federal investigations, not just by congressional committees, but also by the special counsel, Robert Mueller, at the FBI. And he and his businesses have been the subject of federal grand jury subpoenas over the past couple of months. And you would think that that would create, for him, all the same pressure that Mike Flynn felt to get his legal ducks in a row, to take care of things that the Justice Department oversees, things like filing his Foreign Agent Registration Act paperwork. You'd think that Manafort would feel that same pressure. But despite all those press reports that suggested Manafort was going to do that registration right after Flynn did months ago, he didn't, which has been weird over these few months. It has led us on this show to discover that Attorney General Jeff Sessions, who said he was recused from all matters related to the campaign for president in 2016, who said he was recused explicitly from any matter involving a Justice Department investigation of Mike Flynn. We discovered, sort of incidentally, when we were just trying to pull this Paul Manafort thread, that Attorney General Jeff Sessions wouldn't say whether he was recused from any Justice Department investigation involving Trump campaign chair Paul Manafort. He wouldn't say one way or the other whether he was recused from any investigation about Manafort. Why is that? Why won't you just tell us yes or no? It's been weird all this time. Well, tonight, the Washington Post reports that Trump campaign chair Paul Manafort has now officially, as of today, finally, retroactively registered as a foreign agent. His registration reportedly covers 2 years from 2012 to 2014. I say reportedly because we're going on the Washington Post's details here. We ourselves have not been able to get our hands on the filing yet. According to the Post, Manafort reports that he and his firm got over $17 million over those 2 years from the pro-Putin political party that he worked for in Ukraine. Now, why Paul Manafort felt compelled today to register for something he says he stopped doing 3 years ago? We don't know. What's going on in your life that makes you want to tidy that up? We do have reports that Special Counsel Robert Mueller is consolidating all of the various investigations around the Russian attack on our election last year, investigations that may include people like Mike Flynn and Paul Manafort and others. So, now, 2 top Trump campaign folks retroactively registered as foreign agents. Why it took this long for Manafort to register, I don't know. What that says about the ongoing investigation, I don't know. But we're going to talk with Senator Mark Warner, the top Democrat in the Intelligence Committee, about this in just a moment. And we're going to talk with him about the one other news story that broke on this today, and that is next. Stay with us.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.